Wales' biggest conversation.
The BBC Radio Wales phone-in with Jason Mohammed.
And a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to the programme. The US and the UK have not ruled out arming the rebels seeking to overthrow the Libyan leader Colonel Gaddafi. So do you think we should send arms to the rebels and help them? The lines are open now. You can have your say. 03700 100 110.
The BBC Radio Wales phone-in.
Call
03700 100 110.
Text
81012.
Email through the website
bbc.co.uk/Radio Wales.
This is Wales' biggest
The
conversation.
BBC Radio Wales phone-in.
BBC Radio Wales. So the lines are open now. As you heard in the news, pro-Gaddafi forces are driving the rebels out of the oil town of Ras Al-Nouf in Libya. The United States and the UK say they do not rule out supplying weapons to the rebels. So do you think we should arm them? The number to call is 03700 100 110. You can email via the website. Text me 81012. You can send me a tweet via Twitter at JasonPhoneIn. Well, also coming up today at 1:15, my special guest is the Chief Executive of Cardiff City Football Club. He's on the programme today taking your calls, answering your questions. We've already had a lot of questions in via Twitter. So if you want to ask that all-important question about the future of Cardiff City, about Welsh football in general, about his feelings on Welsh rugby, don't forget he was Chief Executive of the Dragons before taking up the reins of the Cardiff City Stadium, then now is your chance. Not often you'll get a chance to speak to the Chief Executive of a football club live on the radio. So get your calls in now, please. As I say, we've had lots of questions already on Twitter, but if you want to speak to Gethin Jenkins live on the programme, then register your interest now. 03700 100 110 is the number to call. You can text me, email me, or of course, if you prefer, put your question on Twitter. Of course, we will have a full roundup of all the latest news and developments in Libya in Radio Wales News at 1 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, obviously. Well, pro-Gaddafi forces have driven the rebels back tens of kilometres over ground they took in recent days after coalition airstrikes. The United States and the UK say they don't rule out supplying weapons to the rebels, although France has said a new UN resolution would be needed. So what do you think? Should we arm the rebels? Peter on Twitter says we shouldn't even be there, let alone arm the rebels. Ray says, absolute madness arming this ragtag army of ruffians. They could then use those weapons against us. Who knows? Alan on Twitter says, when the rebels massacre a Gaddafi town, does NATO bomb the rebels? And in brackets, to protect civilians under the mandate. Matt says, I don't believe the rebels should be armed. On Newsnight 2 weeks ago, Jeremy went to speak to someone about the Americans' involvement in war in Arab countries. If the West involve themselves, then Libyans have long memories. They remember what the West did in wars gone by. They haven't asked for Western help so far. It's very dangerous to arm the rebels, says Matt. The Americans now seem to be advising the British government. Now that they're being fired on, what happens after? What's the way forward? Do you just hand it over to the rebels? No, says Matt. We have no cash. How can we pay for a war, says this texter. Well, lots of texts coming in already. Good afternoon to Dr. Omar Freitas, who's from Libya, has been living in Wales for 16 years. Hello, Omar. Welcome to you.
Oh, hello.
Good afternoon to you, sir. Nabila Ramdani is here, who's a journalist and commentator who specialises in the Arab world. Hello, Nabila. Welcome to you.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hi. As we heard, Nabila, in the news at 1 o'clock there, rebels are losing control of Ras Al-Nouf and Bin Jawad. The rebels are trying to hold their line. They don't have any firepower. So do you think it's time that arms were sent from this country to help the rebels?
Not at all. And I largely agree with all the comments you've been reading from people who left comments with you. Let's not forget that only a few days ago, Hillary Clinton, the US Secretary of State, was herself saying before this fantastic U-turn at the NATO summit yesterday, she was asking, who are the rebels? And she was saying, we are working overtime here in Washington to try to work out who these people are, because we're not sure if they are reliable. Who are they? They might turn out to be worse than the Gaddafi regime. Now let's go beyond that. If we start arming the rebels, this goes way beyond the initial mission of the UN resolution. The perception already is that the now NATO-led coalition is massively taking sides. It's not a neutral force. The potential onslaught on the city of Benghazi, the stronghold of the rebels, has now been avoided. A no-fly zone has now been imposed. But the coalition is going further than that. It's effectively providing air cover for the rebels to push westwards towards Tripoli with confidence. The French have hit a grounded aircraft and tanks that were not moving, and Britain and indeed France are now openly calling for Gaddafi loyalists to defect. So it's going well beyond the initial mission. And may I add something very crucial here, that patently killings are going on both sides. The Gaddafi regime is determined to keep putting down the uprising, while the rebels, the armed rebels, are also carrying out horrific actions, not only against Gaddafi soldiers and airmen, but also against civilian populations. The kind of Stalin organs, the Katyusha rockets they're launching, the multi-rocket launchers they're using, they're dated, but they're hugely effective. We're not talking about precise bombing, but about random killing. And I have seen pictures of soldiers being beheaded, Gaddafi soldiers beheaded, and whose body have been mutilated by the rebels. So effectively, a civil war is going on in Libya, and it's hard to imagine the degree of savagery. And that's why Turkey's suggestion of now imposing a ceasefire and starting negotiations cannot come anytime soon.
So are you telling me, Nabila, to your mind, you believe that within that rebel movement there are extremist elements?
Very much so. I do not believe so. I know so for a fact. I have seen very graphic pictures of Gaddafi soldiers being decapitated and mutilated. Now, that goes way beyond defending oneself, against an oppressive regime, effectively. So, and the kind of weaponry the rebels are using are not precise bombing. They are random. We're talking about random killings. So killings are going on both sides. It's not about protecting themselves anymore. It's about being involved in a war.
Okay.
And that implies...
Well, as I speak, the Prime Minister David Cameron is obviously hosting Prime Minister's Question Times. He has just told the House of Commons that Britain has not ruled out providing arms to the rebels in Libya, but has stressed he has not taken the decision to do so just yet. But Omar Freitas, David Cameron has just told the House of Commons that Britain has not ruled out providing arms to the rebels in Libya. Would you urge him to do so?
I would welcome that. Your previous speaker, I don't know, she must have seen things which no one else had seen.
Well, it's all over the French press,
sorry, could you
French,
give me?
As you know, is very much a hawk in all this.
Yeah, could you give me a chance? Could you? I did not interrupt. I did not interrupt you when you were talking. So could you please give me a chance? No, I'm not asking you. I'm not asking you. I am Libyan. I am Libyan. I know for a fact, and no one is concerned or more concerned. I'm certainly more concerned about what's happening in the country which was born in the country which I was brought up in, and I would challenge what you have been saying. Have you visited Libya recently?
I have indeed. I'm recently back from Tripoli, and I've interviewed Colonel Gaddafi himself.
Oh, well,
I've met his son, Saif al-Islam, on several occasions.
Yeah.
I have written very harshly on the Gaddafi regime on repeated occasions.
All right.
I do not, I think it's an abominable and ruthless regime, and therefore the rebels have, are perfectly legitimate to take up arms and challenge the regime. But it's not up to the West to try and impose their conditions on sorting out yet another Muslim country. We have been involved in Iraq and in Afghanistan. More than a decade later, we have been unable to establish democracy. And this arrogance and, this patronizing attitude of the West, we keep doing the same mistake again. This idea that the West can bring about democracy in all these countries.
I have to say to you, Omar, let me just intervene here if I can. I have to say to you, Omar, I know you've taken part in this programme before now, but when we have discussed Libya over the past fortnight or so, and I've asked that general question, should the West be involved in Libya, it's an unequivocal no.
Unequivocal no
from the listeners of this program. They don't want to be involved in Libya.
No, I fully agree. And I remember, if you recall what you and I had said, that we don't...
There's a mobile phone going off there. Yeah. Whose mobile phone is going off? Is that yours, Omar?
Yeah, it's mine.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Dave.
I have turned it off.
You've turned it off. Okay, go on you go.
Yeah. I am not in favor of troops on the ground. I am in favor of support militarily to the opposition. I don't call them rebel. These are people who rose against a regime. They want democracy for their country. There are countries led by France who recognize them. I'm not talking about arming or supplying arms to a bunch of people who we see on the television fighting Gaddafi's forces. I am in support of a well-organized supply of arms to a body, and this body is the Transitional Council for Libya.
Well, it's a political body, and that's why I think the way forward is politics. It's now time to sit down around a table and negotiate the future of Libya. But this discussion should take place with the Libyan people, not with David Cameron, with President
It's too late for that, though, isn't it, Nabila?
Not with the US.
Nabila, it's too late for that, isn't it? It's too late for any political end to...
It is at all. As I said...
What is it? At the moment, you've got this bizarre situation happening on the ground where, in conflict terms, in international conflict terms, it's heading for a stalemate. So how can you somehow rectify it by sitting around a table?
Jason, the initial aim of the UN resolution was threefold. Protect civilians. Well, we've managed to avoid a potential onslaught on Benghazi. And the violence, we are fueling it, and let the Libyan people decide for the future. And that's where we should now make sure that the Libyans have a say in their own future. And it shouldn't be discussed in Paris, it shouldn't be discussed in London, it shouldn't be discussed in Washington or anywhere else.
Where do you think it should be discussed? Look at Misrata as a good example. Misrata, which has been consistently and continuously bombarded round the clock every day for the past 4 weeks. There are no hospital, there is no medical supplies, there are tanks and there is heavy artilleries consistently bombarding civilians. And
but that's exactly the point I was making, Dr. Freitas. I was making the point very clearly that a civil war is going on. Killings are happening on both sides.
No,
and the rebels are also killing civilians in the wake of in their struggle.
I am sorry.
The concerns comes.
I am sorry. This is a one-way street. We have not. There is a United Nations resolution. There is a Security Council resolution for cessation of hostilities. Where is that? What is happening to that? Why is bombardment to Misrata and Zintan and Zawiya before that? Why didn't that stop? Where were you to say, oh, they shouldn't be? Those people are being killed. Do you think that people should just lay down their arms or whatever they have got and just be killed just like that? They should be given the chance to defend themselves. It's gone beyond that.
Let me tell you what some of our listeners are saying, Nabila, and also Dr. Omar. This is from Archie in Cwmbran, who says, we should supply the Libyan rebels with all those weapons of mass destruction we recovered from Saddam Hussein's Iraq in 2003. It's a win-win, says Archie. This texter says, give the weapons we probably gave Gaddafi in the past, anything to get rid of that nutter. Clive says, how can the West claim they're protecting civilians when they're now saying we will arm these so-called rebels? We do not know who they are. We would be better trying to broker a peace deal. Keep your calls coming, please, and your text 03700 100 110. We'll get Dave's thoughts and Roy's in just a second. Roy in Abergavenny, their take on the situation in Libya in just a moment. It's 12:70.
He's one of Britain's most revered actors.
All of it, for me, was an accident. I've never got a job from an audition in my life.
Who might never have played Sebastian in Brideshead Revisited.
They were constantly talking about the Charles Ryder role. And I said, can I just put in a plea? Because I am completely obsessed with the idea of Sebastian. And then I sort of went away and thought, well, it'll never happen.
Actor Anthony Andrews meets Aled Jones.
What was it like doing My Fair Lady?
It was just fantastic. I mean, I said it at the end on the last performance. This had been the greatest experience of my career, and it really was.
Sunday at 12 on your BBC Radio Wales.
Obviously, we'll keep you right up to date with what's going on in the House of Commons. As I say, David Cameron has insisted no decision has been taken yet on arming the rebels, but has told the House of Commons in the past 18 minutes or so he does not rule it out. And of course, we will be hearing from the Foreign Secretary, William Hague. If we hear anything that is significant to this debate, we will, of course, bring it to you first right here on BBC Radio Wales. Right, let's go to Dave and Roy, find out how they're feeling today. Roy, first to you. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
Is it time to arm the rebels?
No, why do we think we've got to police the world? Why stop at Libya and many regimes in Africa which are equally not conform to our so-called rules, our democracy? Leave them alone, let them sort it out themselves. And how is it suddenly we've got plenty of money to do these things? It's not long ago, austerity has been brought in, but they can find the money to lob the rockets and bombs at Libya.
Mm. Do you think it's an arrogance, Roy?
Yes, certainly arrogance, yeah. Who do we think we are? We in America think we've got to police the world. We're always right and they're always wrong.
What do you do then, Roy? Do you leave Gaddafi in charge there to kill his own
leave
people?
Them to sort out themselves. There's obviously a revolution there. If there's a revolution there, let that take its course.
Dave, how are you feeling about Libya today?
Very sad. I can't see an outcome other than a bloodbath. You know, if the insurgents win, the rebels, they're going to kill Gaddafi supporters. If Gaddafi wins, he's going to kill the rebels. It's going to be a bloodbath. What intrigues me is, where is the Arab League in this? We need a peacekeeping force in there, and it has to come from the Arab League. They have to act and stop talking and demanding. They demanded airstrikes from us to protect civilians, but they are doing nothing. It's down to the Arab nations to sort this out, not Britain, not France, not America.
You say that. Many people share that same view when we've discussed this issue over the past few weeks. Why is it up to the Arab nations?
Because they don't like Westerners anyway. And if we put troops in there, it will be immediately turned as an anti-Islamic act and an invasion. And that will cause more unrest throughout the Arab nations. The thing is, they have to take the responsibility for their own type of people. If they want us kept out or they want to slag us off, then they've got to actually act and do something themselves. It's very easy to say we don't want Gaddafi, we don't want this, we don't want that. But immediately we do something, we are in the wrong. They have to make up their minds. And the only way I can see it is for the Arab nations to actually get together with the insurgents, with Gaddafi, and sort it out themselves to avoid a bloodbath.
Well, let me put that to Nabila Ramdani, who's a journalist and commentator who specialises in the Arab world. Nabila, Dave wants the Arab nations to be a bit more proactive than they have been. They obviously have been sat around the table. Have they done enough?
Well, the contribution from the Arab world has always been tokenistic from the start, and more ambivalent now. We've seen how Egypt has welcomed an intervention to prevent a potential onslaught on Benghazi at the beginning. Straight afterwards, there was a U-turn saying, well, actually, we didn't envisage the kind of military action, the heavy military action that's being carried out, and we'll have to ask the NATO coalition now to be very careful but the realization that there will be inevitably civilian people ending up dying hit home, if I may say so. And David Cameron was quite mistaken yesterday when he said that there is widespread support in the Arab world for the military intervention. It's not true. The perception increasingly in the Arab and indeed the Muslim world is that it's a sinister reminder of what's happened in Iraq, of what's happened in Afghanistan, least of all in the rhetoric when you hear Prime Minister Cameron using a justification saying it's a just cause. Well, it's a sinister reminder of George W. Bush's rhetoric of just war and talks of collateral damage. I mean, that kind of vocabulary is such a sinister reminder of both Iraq and Afghanistan, and the perception in the Muslim world is that it's yet again a Western military intervention in another Muslim country.
I want to introduce you to Air Vice Marshal Tony Mason, who's a former advisor to the House of Commons Defence Committee. Air Vice Marshal Tony Mason, good afternoon to you, sir. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Jason.
Arming the rebels. So very good to have you on the programme, I should say. We haven't spoken for a while. It's good to always have you on the programme. Arming the rebels. Does this take a very complicated conflict even further?
Yes, it does. It does, Jason. I'm thinking a great deal about this. It is a very, very difficult decision to make, but I come down on the view that the importance and so far the value and the significance of this intervention has been based on a very precise United Nations authority, supported generally by the local regional countries. And when the question of raising arming the rebels is raised, there are two responses, I think. The first one is that if there was a perception that the rebel civilians were being beaten and suffering heavily at the hands of Gaddafi's armed forces, then there may just be an interpretation of the United Nations resolution which would permit the arming of freedom fighters or rebels, whichever you care to choose. But my concern, actually, at that point, reflects the comments of both your last contributors.
Yeah.
I believe that a positive step like that would risk, first of all, weakening NATO's support. There are 28 nations, remember, and we need unanimous support. And secondly, it would risk the continuing support of the Arab countries surrounding him. So I think it would be a very, very risky situation, and one that we hope could be avoided.
Tony, Dave made a very good point there, and it's one shared by many of the listeners when we have discussed Libya. They want the Arab nations, the Islamic world, to take on a greater role around the table in discussing Libya. But it's fair to point out, isn't it, if you watch the coverage, if you listen to the coverage yesterday of that summit in London yesterday, there was widespread representation from the Islamic world.
Yes. Yes, there was. And, of course, can I just make a military point, first of all, without in any way gainsaying the political context. The problem, of course, is that the Arab countries have got no tradition of organising a joint campaign. When they've tried it in the past, it hasn't worked. There's no experience of common training. There's no experience of intervention, with the unfortunate exception of Iraq invading Kuwait. And so for the Arabs themselves to coordinate a military activity, quite apart from the search for any overarching political agreement, that is very, very difficult, which is why, of course, the initial intervention to protect civilians was warmly welcomed by Arab neighbours.
Let's go to Peter in Merthyr. Hello, Peter.
Good afternoon, Jason.
Hi. Is it time to arm the rebels?
Certainly not. I agree with the last speaker, actually. He touched on what I was about to say to you, is that it's very well for our coalition government to say we should get rid of Gaddafi. What Parliament hasn't told me so far, and the people who are saying get rid of Gaddafi, let me say at the beginning, first of all, he is a tyrant. Nobody could defend that he isn't. Now, nobody has told me so far is how is Libya going to run the day after Gaddafi has gone? There are no legal institutions. There are no political institutions. And all the other institutions that are required to run a modern country aren't there. What you will have is civil war for years, and we'll be caught up in that. Now, somebody has to tell me that won't happen.
I suppose you do have the National Transitional Council of Libya.
Oh, come on.
Which is the 30-strong group representing the opposition.
Oh, come on. What experience have they had to run a country like this?
It's a good point. Let's ask Nabila. She should know. Nabila, who are the so-called, what's the National Transition Council of Libya? Who are they?
Well, I mean, the previous speaker has made a very good point. He highlighted the fact that, Libya has been a dictatorship for now nearly 42 years. There's, of course, no history of, political dissent. It has been banned for all this time. No, of course, freedom of association, all the basic fundamental rights that we enjoy in the West and that we take for granted are, of course, denied to Libyan citizens. And for that reason, there is no history of, political activity in Libya. So it's very hard for whoever wants to take over and to organize themselves and set up, political structures and get the country running, as it were. But I do trust, the people. Having said that, I do trust the people to, they know exactly how things are done elsewhere. As we've seen, the main reason behind all these Arab revolts is because all these people are now open to the world. They are technologically savvy. They know what's going on everywhere else. And I trust the people to make the decisions that they feel are right for them. So I'm not worried about who is going to take over, to be honest. I'm just worried about the point that the previous speaker was talking about, which is a civil war. We are heading towards a bloody civil war that is likely to last for decades.
Can I
if we do not intervene very strongly now.
Dr. Omar Freitas, come back in, because I do want to put another question to Peter and Merthyr. Come back in, Dr. Omar Freitas.
I just want to say a couple of things, really. When Gaddafi came to power in '69, one of the first slogans he put up, and I remember that as a young boy, any political party equate treason to the country. So there are no political affiliation in any shape or form. However, the people on the council who I know of or are people of my generation, people who I went to school with, people who are educated, university professors, doctors, judges. I have got faith in them and I have got trust in them, and I don't think we are dealing with people who don't know what they are doing. They are highly motivated, well educated, and very well cultured, and have got good visions for the country.
Okay, Nabila, I will come back to you, I promise you, but you're with me till 1 o'clock. Unfortunately, Tony is leaving us in just a second. So final question to you, Tony.
Yep.
State television in Libya this afternoon are reporting and expressing their anger about, and this is inverted commas, the barbaric colonialist crusader aggression against the Libyan people. An international perspective from a military man. Are you worried about the image of this so-called Western aggression stroke arrogance?
I'm worried about the potential if the image goes unchallenged. I draw some consolation, Jason, from the fact that despite watching as many outlets as I can, from Al Jazeera in one direction to CNN in the other, Gaddafi and his side have been very, very slow to, or apparently unable to produce civilian casualties. When one thinks back to previous conflicts, for example, you and I have discussed Iraq before, and you know my very, very strong, consistent opposition to our presence in Iraq. It does look this time as though the attacks have been precise. There have been very, very few, certainly not enough casualties to bust the reporters to see them, which is very unusual. So Gaddafi is still using the media and playing on coalition divisions. My concern is that this campaign does the war crisis, call it what you will, drags on for a long time. And if I may make just one other comment, your correspondent, your contributor there, Ms. Nabila, said, I think she said, I may have misheard it, but I think she called for strong intervention, the need for strong intervention. And I wondered what that meant, because the only strong intervention that I could see which would be productive would be regional, possibly coordinated by Turkey, which, of course, has already offered to mediate.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Very nice to talk to you, Air Vice Marshal Tony Mason. We will put that point to Nabila Ramdani, Dr. Omar Freitas. Both stay with me. Lots of your calls coming in. We'll talk to Lord Anderson of Swansea, who's a former chairman of the Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee, in just a moment. After the latest travel with Mark Buckley, it's 12:32.
Jason, thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, to the M4. Got two breakdowns at the moment. First of all, eastbound, got a lane 1 closure, 40 to 38. That's Taibach or Port Talbot through towards Margam. And again, further east, about half a mile east of junction 25 at Caerleon. Both those instances, lane 1's out of action, but in both those instances as well, traffic is moving on the live Traffic Wales cameras. Mid and West Wales, problem-free from David Powers Police. Town and city centres actually looking good as well from the respective CCTV control room so far this afternoon. A55 busy both ways in the roadworks around Abergele at junction 24, but certainly all on the move, and the good news continues for public transport with no major problems to report. But of course, any updates always welcome throughout the afternoon. 03 700 100 110's the number. For now, that's the latest from BBC Radio Wales Travel.
Well, the AFP news agency are reporting that pro-Gaddafi forces are pounding the western city of Misrata with heavy artillery. Rebels are quoted as saying by the AFP news agency. That news just into us here at BBC Radio Wales. Well, Jim says, we supplied arms to the Afghan rebels when they were fighting the Soviets. Now the Afghans use the same weapons to kill our troops. This anonymous texter says, I was born in 1947, not long after the Second World War, and as long as I can remember, we've been involved in conflicts around the world, be it Korea, Aden, China, Falklands, Iraq, Afghanistan, now Libya. Let's cut to the quick. We are a war-mongering nation. Why have we got involved? Right, we'll go back to the lines in just a second, but let's just pick up on that point that Air Vice Marshal Tony Mason made. Nabila Ramdani, his question to you was going to be on the lines of strategy and invention. What happens next?
Well, I want to clarify the point I was making when I was saying that there's a need for strong intervention. I meant that I think Turkey's suggestion and Turkey's role within the NATO coalition is now key, because Turkey is suggesting now that to bring about a ceasefire and negotiations. So I think this is what I meant by a very strong intervention, i.e. The suggestion that we effectively end the military action and we start talking at this point.
Okay, this texter says, perhaps we should arm Gaza and Hamas the next time they're bombed and shelled. Bit of consistency here, asks this texter. Graham in Haverfordwest, surely the Arab League should lead this action in Libya. The League requested help, and they should take the action to resolve the problems. The United States supported the Afghan problems years ago. Now we're losing our soldiers there in the mess that the Americans created. Here we go again. The West are creating another monster that no doubt the Islamic nations will turn against us. Liam says, Jace, we're in Libya because it has oil. Oil reserves across the planet are decreasing, so whoever has the oil will have the power. We won't just arm the rebels, we'll have boots on the ground by the end of the year, and we'll put in place a puppet government that will inevitably turn on us in about 5 to 10 years' time. The West always fail to look at history when making these types of decisions. When will we ever learn, asks Liam. Stay out of Libya, ignore the United States and Europe, do not send in arms. The Arab countries must sort out this problem of Gaddafi themselves. Our politicians need to be sorting our problems. Well, interesting flavour on the text there. Let's go to Vaughan in Llansaint. Hi, Vaughan.
Yes, hello, Jason.
Hi. Do you think it's time to arm the rebels, Vaughan?
Oh, no, don't do that. What's happening is like a lot of people have been saying on your programme, about Afghanistan, how we armed them and everything. Same as, Iraq back in the 80s, and everything like that, the secret weapons went over there when Iran and Iraq were at war with each other. And you don't know who these people are, the rebels, you could have Al-Qaeda sort of infiltrating or have been infiltrating for, from the time this started off in Libya, knowing, that this could be what is actually happened, as it goes along, they knew what was going to happen, these people are quite clever,
How would you sum up the situation that we find ourselves in, Vaughan?
Sorry, sir?
How would you sum up this situation that we find ourselves in?
Or sum it up, I think...
Lots of people are saying it's a mess.
Well, it is a total mess, and the thing is, we should not be sort of getting involved. We should just let them carry on with it, I'm sure, at the end of the day, you know, something will happen and they will overthrow Gaddafi themselves.
Well, stay there, Vaughan. Dr. Omar Freitas, I'd be interested to hear your response to Vaughan there. Vaughan just says, let them carry on, get on with it, do it yourselves.
Yeah, surely we have moral duty. If you are walking in Wales, in the streets of Cardiff or in Swansea, and you see someone beating someone up to the death, would you be a bystander? This is not, and this is not a civil war. People had referred to this many times as civil war. People are fighting for their freedom, and the parts which have not been liberated are besieged. Once this besiege is broken, once the siege is broken, then you will see that this is not a civil war. I get reports from Tripoli, from people who I know, that it is impossible to go out in the streets for more than 2 people. When they are seen walking in any form or shape of gathering or talking, they get shot. They don't get dispersed, they get shot. And sorry, yeah?
Well, I do want Vaughan to answer that question. Vaughan, what do you do? It's a pretty good question that Omar has put to you. He's put it in very simple terms, that if you were walking in Wales and somebody was attacking somebody, do you walk on by, or do you actually react and stand up, act responsibly, you have a moral duty to intervene?
No, I would intervene if I saw something like that, you know, on my own streets and everything like that. But this is a different country, and we're asking. We've been asked to more or less provide, or we're going to provide them with weapons against their own people. And again, we don't know who these people are. Like somebody said earlier on, the United States said, you know, they weren't sure who they were actually dealing with. And it's only the beginning of the week, David Cameron found out, yes, we've just found out, like, you know, more or less who we're dealing with or what have you. And yet, you know, and like I said, you know, the concern is Al-Qaeda, again, infiltrated. They've been infiltrated. They don't know, the rebels who might not know who they are. And once they get hold of the weapons and everything like that, I mean, you know, it's a very, very dangerous situation. A very dangerous situation, and it could go on a lot further, where we're always interfering in other people's countries and everything like that. I don't know whether it's about oil or anything like that, but, you know, Iraq got oil. I know Afghanistan hasn't got to go there, but, you know, there's connections there somewhere, isn't there?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I can tell you that the Foreign Secretary, William Hague, is now addressing the Commons. He's saying that the United Kingdom has expelled Libyan diplomats who could pose a threat to our security. So that news just in. We'll keep you right up to date. Vaughan, thank you very much indeed. This is a text from Alan in Cardiff, who says, this Libyan conflict is a difficult one to call. They are our brothers and sisters out there who are losing their lives. Do we ignore them, or should we act like the Good Samaritan? This is from Cliff on Twitter. Nabila, listen to this. Not our job to arm the rebels, in my opinion. Very tricky situation. Yes, the general consensus is Gaddafi should go, but how?
Yeah, well, I think the U.S. Marshal, I think his title was, made a very good point that hasn't, you know, been discussed as it should have been over the last few weeks. He made a good point that if you watch, you know, all the media organizations, all the reports coming out of Libya, there isn't enough evidence, or if at all, of civilian casualties being called by the Gaddafi regime. We're not, you know, I haven't seen the mass, you know, slaughter that we're all talking about, supposedly committed by the Gaddafi regime. What we have seen is a regime that has been careful because they knew that the West was keeping very close tabs on how they were going on about repressing the legitimate rebellion, and they have been very careful about, you know, avoiding civilians casualties. So that's a crucial point that we have to bear in mind. And their line has always been that there is a rebellion going on in the country, and they are quelling it. And we should accept that.
Nabila, I think there's one point that we've left out in the first 42 minutes of this discussion, that Hillary Clinton yesterday and Mr. Cameron were trying to put on a united front. How significant, Nabila, for you was it that the African Union and Saudi Arabia were absent from that conference yesterday?
think it would be quite cocky, if I may say so, if Saudi Arabia turned up at that meeting, given that they are being given the all clear by the United States to go on and slaughter the people of Bahrain. And dare I say, news channels, news organizations like Al Jazeera are, massively anti-Gaddafi. They made that abundantly clear. And that's why perhaps the coverage of Bahrain is non-existent. I haven't seen a single footage coming out of Al Jazeera covering the absolute slaughter carried out by Saudi Arabian forces in Bahrain. And that's absolutely outrageous. And this point has been raised by your listeners and people who left comments. There's a crucial issue about double standards here. You, Jason, yourself, you raised the moral issue. Well, that's a very crucial point in all that. Since the United States has a long track record in history of backing up dictators. Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is already rewriting U.S. history, saying, we backed up the revolution in Tunisia, we backed up the revolution in Egypt, it's our duty to back up the rebels in Libya. Well, let's not forget, too quickly, that the U.S. didn't back up the revolution in Tunisia until the very, very last minute. Same scenario in Egypt, because those two dictators, namely Ben Ali and Mubarak, were crucial allies in the so-called war on terror, and therefore friends of the United States. The Americans have, over time, they have a history of backing up dictatorships. They have even overthrown democratically elected regimes to put dictatorships in their place, like in Iran.
Yeah.
So this moral compass that suddenly the West has found its moral compass again. It's absolutely absurd.
Well, this very complex situation that the international community are now involved in has perhaps taken another twist today. Let me just bring you this breaking news from the Commons before I do anything else. So who was that there? Was that Omar?
Yeah,
Omar, can you do this in just a second? Let me just bring this news.
Okay.
This news just in. I've a little bit more information about what the Foreign Secretary, William Hague, has announced today. The government has taken steps to expel 5 diplomats at the Libyan embassy in London, including the military attaché. So that news just in. The Foreign Secretary, William Hague, has announced that the government has taken steps to expel 5 diplomats at the Libyan embassy in London, including the military attaché. We'll bring you more on that in just a moment. We'll also talk to Lord Anderson in a second, 12:45.
This is it, Ian. This is it now, my boy. This is what you've been waiting for. This is what you've been working for. The cauldron of excitement. What a moment.
20 years on, after his victory at the US Masters.
Yes, what a man. Wonderful, wonderful play. A very brave putt indeed.
Golfer Ian Woosnam, OBE, talks with John Hopkins.
Everybody says it's great winning majors, but it does change your life. People recognise you, and as my dad said to me, you belong to the public now, and that's what you have to cope with for the rest of your life, really.
A Backpage special, Friday night at 7 on your BBC Radio Wales.
So the US and the UK say they do not rule out supplying weapons to the rebels, although France has said a new UN resolution would be needed. This texter says, by supporting these rebels, are we opening a Pandora's box? Right, let's now talk to Lord Anderson of Swansea, former chairman of the Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Lord Anderson, pleasure to have you on the programme. Welcome.
Always nice to be with you, Jason.
Great to have you with me. Can I get your reaction to that news just in, that William Hague has just told MPs that 5 Libyan diplomats in London have been expelled, including the military attaché?
I don't think it's of great significance. Pretty symbolic. It is unlikely that 5 Libyan diplomats would be any threat to our security, but they want to show that they are distancing themselves from the Gaddafi regime.
The Foreign Secretary did say that they were a threat to national security.
I think that's pushing it very far indeed. As to how 5 diplomats in London could seriously be a threat, I don't know.
OK, right. Let me ask you this question. Arming the rebels, Lord Anderson, is it legal?
Probably not. First of all, the dilemma is this. We don't really know who the rebels are. That it's claimed that there is at least some al-Qaeda influence. We currently have a Foreign Office diplomat in Benghazi trying to ascertain the nature of the people who are leading it. But even if we knew who they are, in my judgment, we would be constrained by international law. At the moment, certainly the US and possibly the UK are using their legal advisors to push the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973 to its limits. That resolution simply says that, yes, no-fly zone, but the main purpose is to protect civilians. And there is, of course, an arms embargo which applies to both sides and is almost certainly not overridden by Security Council Resolution 1973. So I think we'd be entering into very murky waters indeed, even though obviously we want, as part of the Arab awakening, to see the rule of law, to see democracy established over North Africa, but to take sides in that way without a specific UN Security Council resolution would, in my judgment, be against our obligations under international law.
But it's worth pointing out, Lord Anderson, that Mr Cameron, on the 18th of March in the House of Commons, said that the embargo on sending arms to the country still applied. And that paragraph 4, Lord Anderson, to take all necessary measures to protect civilians and civilian-populated areas under the threat of attack, that's pretty strong language, isn't it?
Well, it's a sort of problem we had over Iraq, where each phrase was interpreted to its limits. My judgment is that we want that resolution, no more, no less. And we have dilemmas. For example, let's say that the tanks of Gaddafi were bombarding a particular town, killing civilians. That, no problem there, we take out those tanks. If, however, those same tanks were in retreat, going back onto Tripoli, we have a different problem. They are not posing a threat to civilians, and in my view, it would be very difficult to argue that we would have international law on our side if we were to take out those tanks as if they were in full retreat. Equally, ammunition dumps, probably if those ammunition dumps could be used to kill civilians, probably yes. But it is not equally within, however much people say that Gaddafi himself is an obstacle to peace and security, it would be stretching the Security Council resolution beyond its limits to say that it gives us authority to take out Gaddafi himself.
Right. This texter says, "Hi Jason, it's a waste of taxpayers' money. We have our own problems to sort out." Lord Anderson, back to you in just a moment. Tim's in Penarth. Hello, Tim.
Hello there. My question or my point is that some of these Arab nations at which we would like to take a greater part are themselves pretty despotic regimes, and this is why perhaps they are being a bit ambivalent in coming to the aid of the rebels. And also, I question why Egypt didn't get involved. There we have a nation which has gone through its own revolution and replaced its dictator. It has a land border with Tunisia. It had large numbers of its own citizens in distress when this kicked off, and maybe we should be working with them to as a fellow Arab nation, to work with the rebels and bring some organisation to them, and perhaps give some logistical and perhaps some military support to them.
John in Denbighshire, how are you feeling about Libya today, sir?
Well, good morning. I'm rather disappointed that the so-called rebels have been pushed back somewhat, which is the latest news. On the other hand, to make a general comment, I was rather alarmed to see that a newspaper poll described over 40% of British people as not in favour of the British initiative and French, etc., which I find somewhat alarming. I mean, are the British losing their sense of outrage or moral responsibility? I think we did the right thing. I think Cameron did the right thing. And I hope that we can arm the rebels so that they can capture Gaddafi alive and have him taken to the international court.
Yeah. Well, Nabila, one of my guests here, who's a journalist and commentator who specialises in Arab affairs, believes this is nothing more than arrogance from the West.
Well, it may be, but what are the Arabs going to do about it? Do the Arabs like to have a man like Gaddafi in their midst? We saw in this morning's Times an appalling story about how some of his own people had been captured, tied up, and left in a building basically to die. And there were over 100 of them. This is appalling. this is the kind of thing that he does. Surely the Arabs don't like this, do they?
Thank you very much indeed, John. Thank you, Tim. Lots of text to get through. If the rebels win this conflict and they ban the West access to oil, what will we do then? Says one. Min Campbell urges extreme caution, says Steve on Twitter, in arming the rebels. The legal position is by no means clear. Lord Anderson, let me bring you in on that, because it was a question I was going to put to you. I suppose when you look at Resolution 1973 and the use of all necessary measures, without getting too complicated in the legal jargon, it also goes on to say, notwithstanding paragraph 9 of Resolution 1970, that imposed an embargo on the sale of arms to Libya. But that word notwithstanding, does that mean, and you've been in this situation, I suppose, government lawyers are flicking through their textbooks as we speak?
I'm sure that the lawyers, remember that international law is not as clear as domestic law, and there is always a danger that the lawyers advising the Foreign Office and beyond them NATO will try to fit that law, that interpretation of the law, into what they want. I think we should neither stretch it too far or too little, and the overall objective of the resolution is to protect civilians, no more, no less. The air embargo, the air no-fly zone, is effectively to protect civilians. If we go beyond that, ultimately to get rid of Gaddafi, however much we would like that, in my view, we'd be walking on pretty dangerous ground.
Yeah, let me bring Dr. Omar Freitas in. I promised you I would, Omar, when you tried to get in a little bit earlier. You want the West to arm the rebels. Would you say it's legal?
I don't know the legal side of it, really, but I feel that there is a moral duty to defend civilians, either by air, but the tactics has changed and the game has changed. Now the tanks, from what I hear, from what I see, the tanks, as soon as they see aircrafts, the Allied aircrafts in the air, they retreat. And as soon as the aircraft go away, and they can't stay indefinitely in there, they start attacking civilians. So where would you draw the line? And I feel that part of arming the rebel in a defensive capacity to defend themselves, I'm not talking about arming them to be a concerted, strong power. They're dealing with disproportionate power. This is power which has been billions and billions of pounds has been spent on it over the past 40 years, used against Libyan unarmed or lightly armed civilians. So we have got to support them, to defend themselves at least. And this is my point of view.
Omar, thank you very much indeed. This texter says, have the government not learnt the lessons from Iraq? They are so arrogant. Perhaps they're not fit to be our government. Stay out of Arab problems. Mohammed says, Nabila should not mix Libya with Iraq. Libyans asked for help where others didn't. Josh in Kafili, why aren't these Libyans living over here, not going home to help their countrymen if they're worried? As for arming the rebels, no good if they run at the first sound of gunfire. Hello, Clive in Newport.
Hello, Jason. Good afternoon.
Is it time to arm the rebels, do you think, Clive?
Definitely not. I think your guest there, Nabila, she talked complete and utter sense. I mean, how can the coalition claim they're trying to save civilians when they're now, thinking of arming them? Make no mistake. I mean, this is a civil war, a bloody civil war, and civil wars are brutal affairs. And I just think really there ought to be more emphasis on looking at a peaceful solution to this.
Can I go back to that issue?
One second, let me just ask Clive. Clive, it's a bit late for that, isn't it?
No, I don't think it is. As Nabila said, I think that Turkey could have a lot of influence in this. I don't think it's too late.
We're talking international politics here, Clive, and you're saying that Turkey has an influential role to play in this.
Well, I think Turkey used to be part of the former colonial power previously in the Ottoman Empire, so maybe they do have a bit of influence. I don't know, but certainly as a sort of a member of NATO, and at the same time they've got a lot of influence. I think they could influence the outcome.
Omar, very quickly, you've got about 10 seconds each. Omar.
Yeah, this is not a civil war. By definition, this is not a civil war. This is an uprising and which being brutalized by a regime. This is not a civil war. You wait until all the besieged cities are free, and you will see that it is not a civil war.
Okay. All right, Nabila, this texter. One second, I want to bring Nabila in. I've got 10 seconds. You've got 10 seconds each because we've got to bring this debate to a close, unfortunately. Nabila, one texter that's just landed on my desk says, this is nothing more than another flag-waving fiasco.
It is indeed, and I think Turkey has indeed a crucial play to role as a Muslim country who has immense clout in the region. We're witnessing just, a war not only on the ground, but a war of words. And the reason for the vagueness and the broadness of the UN resolution was to indeed allege that the aim was to protect civilians when we know that the end game is regime change. It's no coincidence that Gaddafi's compound was hit on day 2 of the conflict. So clearly the coalition wants either to end Gaddafi physically by killing him or by bringing about regime change. The Libyans, just to answer a question put forward by one of your listeners, he said the Libyans didn't ask for help, unlike the Iraqis. Well, let me tell you that as soon as the Libyan rebels start to witness casualties among themselves, they will change opinions. And they've already been warning the West to say, we won't help to a certain extent because we want to avoid death. And this is all about more death and destruction.
Thank you very much indeed. Clive, I'm really sorry we have to leave it there. That's Clive in Newport. My thanks to Dr. Omar Freitas and Nabila Ramdani, and of course to Lord Anderson.